Alright, we've got 21 books to do, and I want this video to be hopefully under half an hour, so let's get ready. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Maddie, and today I'm going to be wrapping up everything that I read in December, which is apparently 21 books. Because I'm home for the Christmas holidays, I was able to take out a ton of graphic novels that I've been wanting to get to this year. I don't really like reading them on ebooks, also just because the color and the design doesn't always transfer as well to a digital copy if it's not made for it, and a lot of ebooks like my Kobo only works in black and white, so I'd much rather get those books in person to be able to fully appreciate the art. I don't know what the hands are. I would just like it to be known that the desktop version of Goodreads sucks, and it is a pain in the butt to find a way that just lists all my read books properly. But the mic on my laptop sucks, so I like to film on my phone and at the time. But anyways, let's get rolling. The very first thing I read this year is Heavy Horns, which is a webcomic done by Joanna Kwan. I read it on Tapas, which is an online webcomic thing. I don't want to get into this too much because in my new announcement video, I guess I'm going to spoil it a little bit, I am going to be doing weekly webcomic videos, and this will be one of the ones that I want to dive into more. The way that the book is described is guy meets guy, but it isn't love at first sight. So this book follows Andreas and Bo as they kind of figure each other out and their romance develops. The kind of twist on this is that Andreas was born with a set of horns. He's kind of become a model and been able to reclaim that a little bit, but it's just this strange genetic thing that they don't really know where it came from, and that's something that becomes a feature of the story as it goes along. It is very well done, very beautifully drawn. There is a little bit of like NSFW stuff in it that usually gets like blacked out because Tapas kind of has blocks on that, and they also do swear a lot. If that's not something that you're in for, don't worry about it. I kind of lucked out because when I started reading it had literally finished like 2 or 3 days ago, so I was able to read the whole story in one sitting, which is something that I love with webcomics. I think I gave this 4 stars. It was really, really good, but I did wish there was a little bit more at the end. The emotional climax of the story like actually made me like gasp. I was like very stressed as I was like reading to figure out what happened. But then all of a sudden it seemed to wrap up a little bit too quickly, and I would have liked a little bit more debrief of what happened after that. But overall, great. Good read. Get it? Good read? Good reads? I'm not funny, it's fine. The next thing that I read is split up into 2 parts just because there is phase 1 that covers the first 3 chapters and phase 2 that covers the next 3 chapters. I don't know if there is a phase 3 out yet because technically we haven't got to the end of the next 3 chapters, but it is another webcomic series that's called Sharp Zero, so I will put the covers for phase 1 and then that'll probably disappear and the cover for phase 2 will come up. This is now one of my favorite webcomic series of all time. I cannot wait for it to update and to be able to read more of the story. I like started this at 1 in the morning after I finished Heavy Horns, and I was so into it that all of a sudden it was 2:30 a.m. and I was like, I need to go to sleep, and I put myself to bed because I wanted to keep reading it. The sense of humor in this story is really, really similar to my sense of humor, which is part of the reason that I love it. The author throws in all these like really quirky things, like 2 characters will like say something or look at each other one way, and then in the background there'll be a rainbow. It'll be like, that was really gay. And there's just a lot of really funny, quirky jokes like that. Jerry Seinfeld shows up randomly, which I'm not going to spoil for you why. But yes, another huge thing that I love about this book is the diversity. This book crams so much good representation. We have trans characters, we have ace characters, we have demisexual characters, we have gender fluid characters, we have agender characters, we have demi-girls. Like, so much representation, and so much representation of like niche, I don't want to say niche, that's not the right word, but of underrepresented groups within like the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, and to be able to see that represented on paper just like made my little heart so happy, and to be able to read about it, and it's also incorporated in such a way where it feels like it's not like shoving it down your throat. I just realized I didn't give you a summary of what it's about. If you did want to know, it follows this main character, Elliot, who lives in this world where superheroes exist. Throughout a series of circumstances, he ends up dying and kind of coming back as this sharp zero. So he's not really a superhero, but he now kind of has these powers that he didn't originally, and it follows that journey. The lore and everything in this book is fascinating. It's so interesting. The art is so beautifully well done. And like I said, I just love all the characters and the story, and I really can't wait to read more. So I gave both of those 5 stars. I literally just reread this the other night and was also up till 2 a.m. Loved it, loved it, loved it. After this, I read the book that I will say is probably the book I am most conflicted on, like, that I've ever read in my entire life. I think I ended up putting it in as 3 stars just because, like, I genuinely had no idea how to rank it. So this book is called Stay Gold, and it's by Tobley McSmith, if I got that right. And essentially this follows the character Pony, who has transferred to a new school because his family is a military family, so they move around a lot. And he's decided that basically he's trans and he's going to stealth at this school, so he doesn't want anyone to know that he's trans because at his last school he became that trans kid and he kind of wants a fresh start. And of course he meets and ended up falling in love with the cheerleader Georgia. Major trigger warnings if you would like to read this book. There is a very explicit and graphic depiction of a hate crime throughout the book, and there is use of transphobic language and actions. And misgendering, all that not fun stuff. This book has beautiful moments. Like, there's a moment where Pony is really struggling, and out of the blue his sister calls him and is like putting all these people on in the bar that she works at, and they're like telling him that he's gonna get through this, he's gonna get to the other side, and he's gonna be able to move out to a city and like be able to live his best life. And that moment is like so beautiful, just to kind of feel that idea that like maybe like it's gonna get better, we can get through this. And then on the other hand, the story has like these really weird conflicting messages about different things. Georgia in particular is a very frustrating character to me because she doesn't want, I don't know how much to say without spoiling it, but basically the way that she treats Pony is not pleasant, and the redemption arc that they give her I don't feel is worthy or satisfying. The hate crime in this book is incredibly difficult to read about, and I don't feel that it's dealt with in the best way, just because I don't feel like they give the character who the crime is committed to enough time to like emotionally recover from it. And there's a lot of mixed messages about like coming out. I was really excited when I was reading this book because a lot of like queer YA literature focuses on people who are either out or like the process of like realizing your identity and coming out. However, even though like the closet is a construct, there are people who choose not to be out for a variety of reasons, whether it's like religious or personal, or they just want to, it just doesn't matter to them, or they want to keep relationships with family that they know they'll lose if they come out, and that's totally okay. Well, I just studied it in school this year that there's this kind of narrative that like basically tells people that if you're not out, you're not proud about yourself, which is totally not true. And there's this sort of pressure to be out in order to be a voice or representation within the community, which is something that Pony really struggles with throughout the book because he wants to support that community, but he's also really tired of having to constantly fight to prove people that he needs to be represented and valid. And it seems like the book is going to make this great statement that it's like, no, it's okay sometimes to choose to put yourself first or just make that decision that's best for you, which might mean not coming out to a group of people. And then the book like does a weird 180 at the end and doesn't really get that across. I'm going to stop talking about it because I have so many opinions that I could go on for forever. But yes, I would just say be careful if you're going into it because of that heavy content matter, and just be wary that it might not have the ending that you would expect or hope for. After that I read Pet, which is by Akwake Emizi. I will probably dub over that because that was terrible. So Pet follows the character Jam, and she lives in this world essentially where monsters don't exist anymore. So in the town of Lucille, all of the, like, I don't want to say bad stuff, that sounds so vague, but like things like racism and sexism and transphobia and child abuse and things like that have all essentially been eradicated by kind of the people that they call like the angels within the community. And all of a sudden, through a series of process, this creature ends up getting dragged out of her mother's painting, whose name is Pet, and he basically says that he has come here to hunt a monster. And all of a sudden Jam is kind of faced with this idea that how does she hunt down a monster if no one thinks that they exist, if they think that they're all gone. This book is really short, but it has a lot of powerful messages about what it means to get to a place where like the world is safe for everyone. I think there's a lot of interesting conversations around the angels, recognizing that angels may have had to do terrible things to get to a good place, and looking at what the cost of it is in order to be able to survive and get through that world. And it's also a really poignant look at what it means to remember the negative things that we've gone through in our lives, and how remembering pain helps us to protect and look out for the people around us. It's a really good book. It has some wonderful representation within it. The main character is a black trans woman, I guess young adult. I think she's like 15 in the book, and that is dealt with very well, and some of the conversations about that are really interesting, and the writing is very poetic in nature, and like I said, it does have a lot of those things that like makes you think with the way that she has written it. So that was another great book I would definitely recommend. After that, I read another one of what is probably one of my favorite books of this year, which is called Two Boys Kissing by David Leviathan. This book. So this book follows two boys kissing who decide that they're going to break the world record for the world's longest kiss. And I think it's something ridiculous like 36 hours or something that they have to kiss for. And at first I was like, that's insane. And then I was like, okay, well, they probably have breaks and they can sit down. No, they can't, like, their lips can't part at any point. So, like, they have to, like, have someone, like, stick a straw in their mouth so that they can drink. They can't go to the washroom, they're not allowed to wear diapers, and they have to stand the entire time. It's wild. But essentially these boys are kind of doing it to make a statement about, like, what two people kissing looks like and what that might mean. While this is happening, the story follows these two characters who are actually ex-boyfriends as they go through this process, and a series of other, I would say established as well as like burgeoning young gay couples. But the most beautiful thing about this book, and like haunting thing about this book, is the fact that the book is narrated by like a chorus of the voices of the people who were lost to the AIDS epidemic. So essentially it is being narrated by this generation of missing gay men who would have got to be essentially like the mentors and the role models for this entire generation of young boys, and they're looking onto them essentially from heaven or wherever you believe the afterlife is, and reminiscing on everything that they had to go through and how they hope that life will be different for these young boys, and the ways that the world has changed and the ways that the world still has so far to go. I cannot recommend this book more highly. I actually found it through a fan fiction, because in the fan fiction one of the characters worked at the libraries and gave this book to someone else and was like, you should read this. So glad that I read that fan fiction. It is insane that that's how I stumbled on this, but definitely worthwhile. I was reading it on my Kobo, and I normally write down quotes from that if I've like checked it out from the library so that I can keep track of them, and I actually made myself stop because there was no way that I was going to be able to keep reading the book and like writing down all these quotes constantly. I very much plan to get my own copy so that I can cover it in sticky notes and all my notes about how gorgeous and heart-wrenching and haunting this novel is. It is beautiful, and I can't say anything more about it. I'm just gonna keep oozing about it if I don't shut up, so please go and read it. After that, I read the graphic novel, The Prince and the Dressmaker, which is written by Jen Wang. It is very beautiful. We got lots of pretty art. And essentially, this follows a young dressmaker named Francis who gets hired to make dresses for the prince of this area, whose name is Sebastian. So the twist of this book is that Sebastian only wears these dresses when they go out at night, largely due to like societal misconceptions about men wearing women's clothing, which is nonsense because clothes don't have a gender. As the book kind of progresses, their relationship kind of develops, and there's more conversations about what Sebastian's life's gonna look like in the future, and it makes all these really interesting commentary about romance, about relationships, about gender roles and identity. It's also really interesting that the setting of this book is kind of this, I don't know what the term would be, medieval, Victorian, I don't know. It is set in this like world where there's, you know, kings and queens, and everyone is still, you know, going to the tailor to get their clothes and things like that in order to make this very modern and progressive conversation. My favorite thing about this book is the ending, but I won't dive into that more here, obviously, because you should go and get this book and read it yourself. This was off Alice Oseman, who does Heartstopper. It was off her list of her favorite graphic novels, so I would recommend checking that one out. So after that, I read the graphic novel This One Summer, which is by Mariko Tamaki and Jillian Tamaki, and this is interesting to me, or Tamaki. I should really Google pronunciation before I do these videos. But these are two Canadian authors, artists, which is really cool. I just read Skim by them, which was interesting. I'll leave that for my January wrap-up video. But this book follows Rose, who every summer goes away with her parents to this beach, and it's kind of their, you know, getaway and their refuge for some time. And there she has kind of like her summer friend, Wendy. So this book is kind of about them growing up, kind of looking for the distraction from this drama, getting wrapped up in the drama that is going on within Owego, what did I call it? Owego Beach, and everything that's going on there as they kind of grow up and come to terms with their lives. It's a really interesting story. There is a trigger warning, content warning for suicide, as well as conversations surrounding teen pregnancy, so if that's not something that you're want to read about, I wouldn't recommend it. I didn't mind it. I gave it 3 stars. It's kind of got this kind of like lilting prose that kind of carries it through, but I just didn't feel like riveted by any of the characters, and I also wasn't like over the moon with some of the things that they said or did, so I think that was just kind of set me on edge a little bit as I was reading it. But overall, not a bad read. I think I just gave it 3 stars because it's just right in the middle there. After that, I read the book Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, which is by Mariko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell. This is also a very pretty book. It's done in like grayscale, just with like pink highlights. And this book follows the main character, Freddie Riley, as she's navigating this relationship that she has with her girlfriend, Laura Dean, who is constantly breaking up with her. It's kind of told through this overarching narrative of her writing to an advice column, and then throughout like actual clips and conversations of like what's happening in her daily life. It's a really good book because I think a lot of times, not that this is a bad thing, but like a lot of queer representation wants to focus on the positive, which is really, really great, but it's also really important to focus on abusive relationships just within YA in general. And I think that's something that this book does really well, is looks at the way that even though Freddie is in high school, Laura Dean is manipulating and like using her whenever she wants to have her around, and it kind of has a lot of these open dialogue and questions about what it means to be in a healthy relationship with someone and to be loved, and to understand that sometimes walking away from a relationship doesn't necessarily mean that you don't love that person, but that you're just recognizing that you need more than that. This book does have conversations, again, about teenage pregnancy, about relationships with people who are quite substantially older. There is a couple things about affairs with people who are in marriages, so if you're not comfortable reading about that, I wouldn't recommend. I think that's everything in there in terms of things to be wary of, just to make sure you're taking care of yourselves before you pick a book to read. After that, I read yet another graphic novel, which is Slow Storm by Danica Novgorod, and I read a few books that are written or done. The art is done by this author. So this book takes place kind of during a twister and in the events of the twister, as it follows this firefighter who is called to a barn that has collapsed and a young illegal immigrant who is hiding there. It was a very good book. The art is kind of like watercolor and ink, I guess. It is very well done, and it kind of has a lot of these interesting conversations about whether following the law is necessarily the right thing sometimes, which I think is a very poignant and timely conversation with a lot of things that are going on in the world right now, and being able to consider that sometimes what you thought is always doing the right thing isn't actually always the right thing. It's fairly short, very simple story, but I would definitely recommend checking that one out. After that, I read a short novella by Mason Deaver, who wrote I Wish You All the Best. I always get that one mixed up for some reason. And this book is called I'll Be Home for Christmas, and it takes place after the events of I Wish You All the Best. The short story following the characters of that book as Ben and their partner Nathan are trying to find a way to get to each other over the holidays, and essentially Ben ends up trapped in an airport trying to get to Nathan with his dog to surprise because a snowstorm has come in. It's a very sweet story. If you loved the characters, then obviously I would recommend checking this out. I think all the proceeds for it are going to support a trans, like an organization that supports trans teens. And other than that, if you don't have the means to support, the story is free on, I think it is Gumroad. So I will try and leave the description or a link to that down in my description. If not, I'm sure they have it available on their website and all of their social media. After that, I read the Backstagers series, which I don't have. I only kept the second one because I wanted to go over it again. But I will flash up the cover. So the very first one is called Rebel Without Applause. And the second one is this one, which is The Show Must Go On. And I can't remember what the last one is called. But essentially the first two follow a continuing storyline, and then the third one, which is called Encore, is just a collection of Halloween and Valentine's Day stories that have been put together with the characters. So this series follows Jory, who moves to a new all-boys school and ends up wanting to try and get involved in some way. He thinks he's gonna check out the drama club and then immediately gets brushed off by the divas who run that and ends up becoming a part of the backstage crew. But he quickly finds out that there is this magical door backstage that kind of goes off into this weird paranormal world of all these kind of crazy goings on. One part kind of teen drama, one part paranormal, I guess mystery? Yeah, because essentially the key plot of the story is years ago there was this group of backstagers, people who worked backstage, who ended up disappearing in the tunnels. So they kind of want to unravel and figure out what's going on. But for that reason, the second volume, the one that I kept to go over, is my favorite, just because of the emotional twist that the story ends up taking as it reveals what happened all those years ago and kind of the solution to the mystery. It's a very good book. We have some great representation that we love. We love like just casual representation of trans characters or gay relationships just thrown in there, because that is the way that it should be done. The art is wonderful. I will like show you guys the page. And kind of this like crazy spooky world that they've kind of designed that goes on behind the scenes is also very well done. If you are someone who was a theater kid in school or a background theater kid, I did a ton of work on all of the sets for our musicals, particularly I think in my grade 10 year, which was a while ago. You'll know that there's all these kind of like cliches that happen in some way that seem to happen in every high school. There's always those like actors who always get the lead roles and like think that they were like born to be in theater and they're like the greatest gift ever to be given to this high school, and treat all the younger actors like crap because the younger actors idolize them. No one really understands what goes on backstage, despite the fact that I know when I worked on the set, I easily put in like over 100 hours putting those set pieces together, and like the actors just treat it like they just kind of like show up somehow. And it's the same thing with like the light and the sound. They just know that it happens, but they don't really know what happens. And there's a lot of good jokes and humor about that throughout this series that I really loved. So yes, those three books are all great. The second one was definitely my favorite. The Encore was just like a little nice something else, and the first book was good as well. Alright, are we getting anywhere close? Okay, I think we have 6 left. After that, I read Pumpkinheads, which is by Rainbow Rowell, and is illustrated by Faith Erin Hicks. So this book follows 2 characters who work at a pumpkin patch, Deja and Josiah, and they're what they call seasonal best friends. So pretty much they work together, they're friends when they're at work, when the pumpkin patch is open, and besides that they don't really talk to each other, and they're kind of celebrating their last day at work, and this is their last year at the pumpkin patch before they go off to school. Josiah has a crush on this girl who works in the fudge shack, and he has never gotten up the nerve to go and talk to her. So the last day, this is what they're gonna do. They're gonna do all their favorite things, and they're gonna go and make sure that Josiah talks to this girl. It's a really, really sweet story. The art is lovely, and I particularly love the fall vibes that it gives, and this very intricate pumpkin patch world that they've been able to develop. I would definitely recommend taking a chance to check it out. It's just a really good story about like friendship and the way that sometimes you don't realize the people who are really important to you until you're leaving. I think I worked throughout most of my high school career, so there's those friends that you have that you pretty much like see on Saturday when you're at work, and then besides that you never really talk to them again. But those people are still a really important and valuable part of your lives, and sometimes it's like, yeah, why do we never talk to each other after this? Because we clearly really like each other and would enjoy spending time together. So yes, another graphic novel. So many of them this month, but I would recommend it. The next book that I read, I don't know where I put it, but I got it for Christmas, and it is called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, and it is by Charlie McKeesey. This is kind of a book done, and I think it is ink, and it follows a boy, a mole, a fox, and a horse, kind of as they meet each other, and they have kind of these open conversations about life. If you've ever read Everyone is an Alabin when you're an Alabin too, it's kind of in the same thread as that. One thing about this book is the writing is all like hand done cursive with the ink. So if you're someone who is dyslexic or struggles with reading difficult handwriting, that can be a very difficult thing that can make this book inaccessible. But besides that, it's very poetic in the way that it's written, and it kind of makes these important sweeping statements about what it means to live and take risks and to enjoy your life and live it to the fullest. So a very sweet story, very short, would recommend. I got that on Christmas Eve and read it in a sitting. After that, I read the graphic novel version of Long Way Down. Long Way Down was one of the first books that I read kind of when quarantine started. So this is obviously Jason Reynolds and then Danica Norgoroff, who did that other book that I read, the Storm one, did the art for this book. The art in this book can be quite graphic at some times, so just be aware of that if you choose to pick up this graphic novel. I think it's really important because it makes the story it's hitting kind of hard hitting, but it can be a lot if you're not expecting it. So obviously content trigger warnings for that, as well as like blood, gore, death, and gun violence. So after the main character's brother Sean is shot, he's kind of been taught these rules as he's growing up, and one of the rules is that you find the person who killed whoever has been shot and you shoot them. So as he's taken his brother's gun and he's heading downstairs to track out who he thinks killed his brother, each floor he hits, somebody walks in who he lost to gun violence, and he essentially like asks him what he's doing and kind of asks him to reflect. It's a really poignant book that is written for a young audience, which can be a little bit hard, I think, for people to wrap their heads around sometimes, but the beautiful prose that Jason Reynolds used kind of forces you to think about what it means to have grief and family, and also the mental toll that it takes on communities. Obviously, in this case, it is a Black community, so particularly in communities of color, to live with violence and death around you constantly, and to feel like those people who mean so much to you aren't going to be around forever. He really extrapolates on that fear and looks at the toll that it can take, especially on youth, in order to ask them to carry that heavy, heavy burden with them. So I'm not quite sure if I like the graphic novel or the book better. I think the book, just because the prose really was what drove me through this, and I wasn't really sure if while the visual component obviously adds a lot, I don't know if I connected with it in the same way. It's hard because obviously you can't like read them both with fresh eyes, so I might be a little bit biased that way. Either way, a good read. After that, I finally finished Pet Sematary, which I started in November at the very end of the month, and I didn't finish until I think after Christmas in December. I did not enjoy it at all, which is kind of sad because I'm a big Stephen King fan. So it follows this family who moves into this new house with their 2 young children, and essentially next to this town is this cemetery that supposedly has kind of this magical ability to resurrect people from the dead. Obviously, it's usually used for people's pets, but I'm not really gonna get into the story more than that without spoiling it. The biggest thing for me is that the actual nitty-gritty horror development stuff of this didn't happen until the last 40 pages. There was so much filler and just random conversations about things that didn't need to be in the book that it was exhausting, because I think about 100 pages in I finally understood, oh, this is where the story is going, and then it took the story like another 200 pages to actually get there. It says on the back that this is the most frightening book that Stephen King has ever written. I strongly disagree. I would not recommend picking it up. That could be my personal opinion. I've heard a lot of people who read it who said they were terrified by it, and I was just bored. So that's how I felt about that. The next book that I read is the very last graphic novel that I read this year, which was by Kevin Panetta, and the illustrations were done by Savannah Ganichu. There we go. So this book follows Ari, who has just finished up high school and he's dying to move to the big city with his band, but he's working at his family's bakery. So he offers his parents that he's going to train someone to be able to take over for him so that he can move to the city. And this is when he meets Hector, and obviously he ends up liking Hector a lot and maybe not wanting to move away to the city as much, and the story kind of follows them as their relationship develops. It's a very interesting story. It has a lot of really key things about like passion and happiness and what it means to be happiness, because Ari kind of learns to fall back in love with baking, this thing that he hated because it was tying him to this town, when he watches how much Hector loves it. There is a huge kind of like twist in the middle that I just had to like flip back and forth a couple times, because I almost didn't believe that what I was reading had actually happened on the page. And there's also this really beautiful conversation between Ari and his parents when they kind of realize that even he's felt like lost for so long, and he kind of starts to rethink what happiness might be, and his parents kind of tell him that they've kind of seen him lose himself a little bit and kind of give him an idea of what they want for him in the future, which is brilliantly executed and so well done. So I would definitely recommend checking out that book. The art is pretty, the story is pretty, and it just made my heart very, very warm. I think that was another one of my favorite graphic novels that I read this month. Alright, we're getting down to it. We're down to the last two books, and I hated both of them. So I will try not to go on a very long rant about how much I hated them and get down to the point so that we can end this video, because it's almost at 40 minutes. So even if I shave off 10 editing, I don't know if that's going to happen. So this book, the next book that I read is called Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron. So this book was on a lot, it's technically a teen book. It was on a lot of like teen YA lists this year. Particularly, I think because its protagonist is a person of color, and there was a lot of wonderful lists this year really encouraging people to read more books that include characters who are people of color, and this book has a black female protagonist. So I thought the premise of it was really interesting, because essentially it's a retelling of Cinderella, where there is this ball that all the girls are required to go to, and if they do not find a suitor, they will be made forfeit, which is as terrible as it sounds. And this book follows a queer protagonist who essentially, she wants her love story to be with a woman and not these men that society is basically telling her that they need to be done with. That her relationship and life needs to be spent with. I don't even know where to start. The biggest issue that I have with this book is its portrayal of men. I think that it is really important to recognize the difference between systems of power that cause people to act a certain way and the actual like behaviors done by people. If I were a young male-identified person who picked up this novel, I would feel really shitty about myself, because every man in this book is terrible. And I understand that she is trying to make a commentary about the systems of power that have been put in place in this world, but it just comes across of this, like, the men get to the point where they're almost these like pig-like caricatures, and they're not even real people, and she's like shoving it down your throat how awful they are. Like, they're all beating women, they're all like blatantly homophobic, and they're all just terrible garbage people, which was really, really difficult to read about, because it felt more personal than actually looking at a system of power and the way that people within the system of power become, I guess in this case, like agents of the patriarchy. So that was really difficult to read. The story itself just has a lot of plot holes, and there are a lot of instances where things just pop up out of convenience for some reason. Like the fact that the other main character that she runs into in the woods, Constance, has been trying to take down this patriarchy for forever and has never thought to go to Cinderella's fairy godmother, despite the fact that this is something her family has been doing for generations, is just very convenient for the plot and very frustrating for the reader. I didn't think I was going to be able to get through it, but I did, and I can say that I do not recommend it. The very last book that I read is The Silence, which is by Dawn DeLillo. I gave this 1 star because I genuinely just had no idea what was going on when I read it. It's a very short story, and essentially it follows 2 different couples, I guess, and then this other guy who's just rambling about Einstein the whole time. So that guy and the 2 people are supposed to be watching the Super Bowl, and this other couple is on a plane, and then there is basically this like blackout that like all technology stops working. So the couple on the plane end up crashing and living, and the people who are supposed to watch the Super Bowl, the TV and everything goes out. And then essentially it devolves into chaos, but the story is mostly told through that one person rambling about Einstein and weird theories, which is very confusing because the premise of the novel is so interesting to me, because the way that the story is described is it's essentially supposed to be about the ways that we've become so reliant on technology that like what would happen if we just woke up tomorrow and like couldn't Google something. Even I've had it before where my like phone's broken, and in that week or so that I don't have it, it's very weird because you're so used to just being able to pick it up and check it. So I thought it would be a really interesting commentary on that, and instead it kind of ended up being this like meta philosophical narrative that was very inaccessible to get into, and because of that I gave it 1 star, but it seems that there was a lot of people on Goodreads who felt the same way. We got through 21 books. This video is clocking in at 40 minutes. I'm really hoping I'm going to be able to narrow it down for you so that when you're watching this, it's not so long. So yes, we got through all of that. That is everything that I read in December, which is a lot. I'm tired. I read 101 books this year. I'm going to be filming a kind of 2020 wrap-up video. Maybe I'll try and get that done tomorrow, hopefully. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up. I never know how to do an outro. Yes, so exciting announcements coming your way, more videos coming your way. Thank you for tuning in 2020. Looking forward to all the best in 2021. I just set my reading goal for this year, which is to read another 100 books, and I'm hoping that I can get there, fingers crossed. Besides that, if you want to follow me, my Goodreads is linked down below. My Instagram is also linked down below as well. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and turn the bell on for notifications. If there's other videos, contents, books, things you'd like me to check out, feel free to leave a comment about that too. And I will see you next time.